Happy Friday, folks. Senior editor Mackenzie DeLulo here, and welcome back to the Texans weekly Roundup podcast. This week, the team discusses Congressman Tony Gonzalez being censured by the Texas Republican Party, Paxton associate and real estate developer Nate Paul being sentenced to jail for contempt of court, Speaker Dade Phelan releasing more priority legislation, including a ban on sexually explicit library books, a parliamentary maneuver to let lawmakers adjourn for extended periods of time, new bills filed to ban taxpayer-funded lobbying, Representative Steve Toth filing a bill to restrict online access to abortion-related materials, Senator Brian Hughes filing a bill to crack down on social, political, or ideological investing, Representative Jeff Leach filing a bill to require healthcare coverage for gender detransitioners, Senator Kevin Sparks filing a bill to reform local government's means of issuing new debt, a Florida federal judge blocking a Biden administration humanitarian parole program to keep non-citizens in the country, a lawsuit before the state Supreme Court to prohibit Austin from paying union employees with public funds, and 5 women filing a lawsuit against the state of Texas and Attorney General Ken Paxton over Texas's pro-life laws. As always, if you have questions for our team, email us at editor@thetexan.news. We'd love to answer your questions on a future podcast. Thanks for listening and enjoy this episode. Well, howdy, folks. Mackenzie here with Cameron, Matt, Hayden, and Brad, again at our new office. And we have pop filters. If you don't know what pop filter is, Google it. They are annoying to work with, but we're making it work, and it makes Daniel's life easier.
Some of us have pop filters. Others of us do not.
That's true.
Well, that's because we're sharing a mic here.
It's true.
You got to make it work.
I know you do.
We're swinging this mic all over the place.
It sounds like chainmail's being handed across the room when
I'm trying
when
not to touch
mics.
the microphone or the stand. It's
well,
you guys will hear.
What's funny is how Cameron is sitting perfectly still, trying not to touch the microphone
when he doesn't have a pop filter and it doesn't matter as much. Yeah, whereas we actually can't touch it. Anyways, we're learning.
That's how I feel. I feel frozen. Like I need to sit here so I don't accidentally bump the mic.
I know. Last week it was Brad hitting the mic a lot, bless his soul, and every time he got so angry at himself. I felt bad, Brad, on behalf of you.
Thanks.
My gosh. Okay. We want to try to empathize with him. Yeah, I know. Okay. Well, Cameron, we're going to go ahead and start with you here. Last week and over the weekend, Congressman Tony Gonzalez was in the news. You were actually at the Texas GOP SREC meeting where all this was going down and kind of walked through the censure where they're listening in, hearing what was going on. So give us a little bit of an inside scoop as to what happened with Congressman Tony Gonzalez last weekend.
Yeah, and first off, shout out to all the subscribers that I met there. There was quite a few people that were giving big props to the Texans, so that was fun. So Gonzalez, he was previously censured by the Medina County Republican Party for some of his votes in support of same-sex marriage, gun control policies, and against some border security measures. And the Medina County Republican Party had accused Gonzalez of lack of fidelity to our founding principles, our national and state constitutions, and the Republican Party of Texas. So what the Republican Party of Texas has is a policy platform. They have a set of principles. And if a Republican lawmaker starts to veer away from those, because what they're supposed to do is follow in alignment with those principles in their voting. So they had called him in for a vote on a censure over the weekend.
So the Republican Party of Texas voted to censure. What does that mean? What kind of teeth might a motion like that have?
So the meeting was held with both local and state party officials, and a censure is where there is a vote to confirm that there were violations of the party's platform. And so they call everyone out of the room, and it's just the party officials, just the local party and state party officials that are involved in that. And so what happens now is, since the censure was confirmed, they can pull financial support from his campaign, and that money can go towards the opposition in the upcoming primary election. And we have already seen there are some names that are going to be in the running. So
Yes, absolutely. Now, was Gonzalez present for this whole debacle? Was he at the meeting?
he was invited, but he did not attend. It wasn't explicitly stated he wasn't going to go, but the day of the meeting, he was posting that he was at an event in his congressional district.
Yeah, out in the district doing his business. Has he commented on the censure, and who from the Republican Party of Texas has said anything?
So the campaign spokesperson for Gonzalez's team actually put out a statement, and an interesting portion of that statement was they said the Republican Party of Texas would be wise to follow his lead and do some actual work. So, of course, that is going to cause a response from the Republican Party of Texas, and Matt Rinaldi, the chairman, said, perhaps it's time to look inward instead of blaming other people. And so, since that vote, there's been a variety of different people who have decided to jump into the primary race for 2024. Right now, at least 3 people have jumped in. So he's going to have some competition coming up.
We expected Congressman Gonzalez to face some competition just because of those votes. Like, you know, if you see that kind of political and policy division in a party, there's likely to be a primary challenge. But I think the censure was the tipping point for people to jump in the race, or, hey, it's time. We can get more publicity for our announcement when all this is going on surrounding the incumbent. So,
and this is actually only the second time in history the Republican Party of Texas has voted to censure a sitting politician. The last time was in 2018 when then House Speaker Joe Strauss was censured.
Ooh, there you go. I remember that day very, very well. Okay, thank you, Cameron. Hayden, an associate of Attorney General Ken Paxton will begin a jail sentence next week. Spicy stuff. Tell us about the contempt of court charges against Nate Paul.
Most people, when they think of contempt of court, probably have in their mind's eye a scene of somebody in a courtroom lashing out at a judge, but this contempt of court happened because of something that happened outside the courtroom. Nate Paul is an associate, or at least a former associate, of Attorney General Ken Paxton. He was at the center of the misconduct allegations against him. Paxton was accused of using the office of the Attorney General to benefit Nate Paul, who is involved in other litigation with a nonprofit foundation. Judge Soifer ordered him to pay a $2 million judgment to this nonprofit that had sued Nate Paul for fraud. And as part of that judgment, Mr. Paul was ordered to provide monthly expense reports to the court and not spend over $25,000 per transaction without seeking prior approval, to make sure that he was making good on this judgment that he had been ordered to pay to the foundation. And Judge Soifer's staff accused Paul of not filing these expense reports for 5 months in a row and making transactions that were well above the authorized limit, including in the 7 figures, or almost in the 7 figures. So he was ordered to jail for 10 days, a jail sentence that begins on Wednesday. And he was also ordered to pay a 6-figure fine for the violations of Judge Soifer's orders. And one of her staff attorneys sent a letter to the parties involved with very critical words for Paul, accusing him of perjuring himself, sitting just feet away from Judge Soifer, and explaining that he would not be allowed to continue to violate the court's orders.
Is there any word on the settlement negotiations with Ken Paxton?
It's ironic that he would be ordered to jail just as the settlement agreement with Ken Paxton seems to be falling apart. Ken Paxton was asking the Texas Supreme Court to keep his case on hold, and not to be confused with the litigation that Paul is involved in. He is in his own lawsuit with the so-called whistleblowers who accused Paxton of fraud while they were bribery and abuse of office while they were still employed with the Attorney General's office and then were subsequently fired. Ken Paxton as I mentioned, asked the Texas Supreme Court to put the case on hold while they worked out a settlement. That settlement was to cost $3.3 million, and there were other concessions that were to be made. But Ken Paxton needs the approval of the legislature for this settlement. And as I understand it, the parties said, we're not going to wait indefinitely while you lobby the legislature for this money. And if you can't get that done, then the Supreme Court, they are asking the Supreme Court to continue considering the case. So the future of that settlement, it was never really certain to begin with, but it is now even more uncertain, especially given Speaker Phelan's comments that he doesn't think the taxpayers should have to pay this at all. So the settlement with Ken Paxton is now in peril.
Spicy stuff. We'll continue to keep an eye on that. And Hayden, thanks for your coverage. Bradley, speaking of the speaker, the bill filing deadline comes tomorrow, or when this podcast comes out, as Speaker Phelan has chosen to announce his chamber's priority bills in batches. What did he announce this week?
So there were 3 slates announced this week. He has kind of grouped them in themes. And so the first batch this week was focused on infrastructure. There was a $5 billion appropriation to broadband development that was filed. Another one creates a couple of water infrastructure funds, one of them to create new supply, and then another one to beef up current supply, current pieces of infrastructure on the water side. And then the third bill in this kind of slate would streamline building processes such as, zoning codes, the hoops, different the hoops builders have to jump through in order to build residences or commercial buildings, things like that. So that was the first grouping. The second was juvenile focused. One would create the Mental Health and Brain Research Institute of Texas, with a focus on not only but largely on mental health for children. The second one would reform the juvenile justice system. And then the third, by Representative Jared Patterson, would prohibit sexually explicit materials in the school libraries. This is one we've heard a lot about, obviously, with the fights going on at a bunch of different school boards between parents, school board members, or school board members themselves, amongst themselves. That's something that the speaker has. This is one of the more culture war type of issues that the speaker has backed. And so this one is making the House priority list, even though it's a higher bill number. It's not within the first 20 bills, but it is in this list. And so the third slate of bills focused on schools. 2 are school safety funding bills. They deal with hardening schools, things like that. They have different purposes, but largely it's the same broad aim in both of those. Another one raises teacher pay. And then another one of this group provides a cost of living adjustment for teacher pensioners. And so before the session, the debate was, does the legislature provide another 13th check, or do they provide a cost of living adjustment? The 13th check would be a one-time sum of money. A COLA would be in perpetuity. And so
do people actually call a cost of living adjustment a COLA?
Yes.
That's cool.
The more you know.
The more you know.
So is it a cola or is it a pop? I'm sorry.
Or a Coke.
Or a Coke. I think it's a Coke, but all right.
Okay.
We've debated that before on this podcast.
Are you done?
We have.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm done. Sorry.
You guys
Yeah, we're done.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead. Back to the COLA.
So it seems like the legislature is going to move forward on the COLA, not the 13th check. Although Dan Patrick has said either, he's happy with either. But being the longer term, more permanent reform, this one appears to be what they're going with.
I prefer root beer, actually.
Root beer is very good.
Yeah.
Dublin Dr. Pepper.
Oh, I don't even know what that is.
What?
I don't know.
Don't you know that Texas is like the original home of the Dr. Pepper?
Well, yes, but Dublin Dr. Pepper?
Dublin Dr. Pepper.
What's-
Okay. Well, they don't make it anymore because
Okay.
The bigger Dr. Pepper company got like, I don't know, angry and ruined my childhood by telling Dublin that they couldn't make the original Dublin Dr. Pepper anymore. But to satisfy the torch-wielding minions,
Like yourself.
like myself, you can occasionally go to a grocery store that stocks, the glass bottle made with sugar Dr. Peppers, which is, in my opinion, as a Dr. Pepper aficionado, actual Dr. Pepper, and this, as my dad would put it, this fake stuff on the grocery store shelves is just a Dr. Pepper impersonation.
Again, the more you know. Hayden, there was recently a dust-up in the Texas House over the pace that lawmakers are working. Give us an overview of the order of business set forth in the state constitution.
If there was a go-to topic to illustrate something that almost no one cares about, it would probably be parliamentary procedure. But it has a greater impact on people's lives than they might realize. There was, as you mentioned recently, a quarrel on the House floor over the constitutional order of business. And it's because lawmakers generally do not start voting on bills until after the 60-day mark in the legislative session. And Matt and I were discussing this earlier. Senators voted on a couple of emergency items yesterday. But other than that, it's been pretty quiet on the House floor in the first 2 months. It's mostly congratulatory resolutions, things like memorial resolutions honoring people close to lawmakers who have passed away. Texas Tech University celebrated its 100th anniversary on the House floor. There are all kinds of things that are mentioned on the House floor, but controversial policy items are usually not on the list during the first 2 months because of this constitutional timeline that is set forth and in the House rules. But there was a disagreement over this recently on the House floor, and it brought out some of these parliamentary procedure distinctions.
You also said this is nerdy stuff for people who don't really care about parliamentary procedure. It reminds me of pastimes of yours when you were younger.
It does.
Yeah.
And we might talk about that later.
I think that would be
Kim making fun of me, but
I think that would be a perfect segue.
yeah.
So Speaker Phelan and one of his main opponents had a very tense exchange over this order of business. And like you were saying, there's kind of been this cloud of rhetoric that's been part of this discussion from both camps. And then there's actually what is required and delegated by the state constitution. What were some of the concerns raised specifically in this exchange, though?
Well, as I mentioned, and this is in my piece at the Texan.news, there's a calendar with some of the key dates of the legislative session. It's generally, there is a pace that lawmakers like to follow. And to give a little bit of background information about this particular disagreement, Speaker Phelan's primary opponent, that might be confusing. His main opponent in the House is probably Representative Tinderholt. He ran against him again in the primary, but I don't want to give the impression that there are these two sides that are warring against each other. This is primarily Representative Tinderholt and Representative Slayton, who are opponents of Speaker Phelan. Representative Goldman was presenting a resolution to allow the House to adjourn for more than 3 days, which is a technicality required in the state constitution. Both chambers have to give the other side permission to not meet on the floor for more than 3 days, and Goldman was bringing up a resolution to do that. Representative Tinderholt went to the back mic and attempted to ask Goldman a series of questions about why don't we use the same instrument, a Senate concurrent resolution, to suspend the Constitution and vote on items before that 60-day mark. And Goldman and Phelan did not want to have that discussion right then and there. So Goldman while Goldman did agree to answer questions from Tinderholt, he pressed him not to comment on his question before asking it. Ultimately, what happened is Speaker Phelan decided that Representative Tinderholt's questions were out of order. And though Tinderholt was trying to make the point that they could be taking up items of business before that 60-day mark, which, according to him, the legislature did do until the 81st session in 2009, which incidentally was the year that Speaker Joe Strauss was elected. The exchange ended with Tinderholt saying, "I hope everyone is ready to get to work like I am and will vote this down." But he and Slayton were the only ones who voted against it. So it was a tense exchange on the floor. We've talked about it on this podcast prior, but it's about to be a moot point because the bill filing deadline is, for us, it's tomorrow. But if you're listening to this, it's today, Friday. So they will now be able to take up those items of business. But Tinderholt was highlighting the fact that there are items on the Republican Party's wish list that will probably go undone because of limited time and because of the pace that lawmakers like to follow.
Did Phelan and Goldman have a solid basis for their objections to Tinderholt's comments?
Like I said, Goldman was willing to answer the questions, but he did not like the fact that Tinderholt was commenting on the questions outside of the that he was providing this commentary with the question. And usually speakers do not keep that tight of a rein on what's said at the back mic, as anyone who's watched Texas legislature for an extended period knows. It's usually pretty casual as long as there's general decorum. But the rules do give Phelan the authority to decide that a line of questioning is not germane, that it's out of order. And much like an attorney gives his client advice, the parliamentarian is able to advise the speaker.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison. Yeah.
Because and there's a misconception that the parliamentarian is the one who makes the call. She really gives the advice. The speaker is the one who makes the decision. And while she may be the expert in parliamentary procedure, ultimately it's Speaker Phelan who makes that final call. And so Speaker Phelan asked him to take his chair. And it was just an unusually tense exchange for this part of the legislative session, which is usually pretty courtly.
Pretty
and
chill.
Very, very chill, yes.
100%. And we haven't really seen these kind of fireworks since the Democrat chair debate. And this, again, was like a tiny compared to the extent of what that was. But regardless, it was very heated. Very, very heated. I'd encourage folks to go back and watch it, too. Like, it was very fascinating. It'll tell you a lot about the dynamics of the House, not just this session, but in general. And like you said, kind of give an idea of what the speaker's role looks like, how much of a reign can he kind of take. There is a lot of discretion in terms of how the speaker operates and what kind of decisions they make, or like you said, what they allow to be spoken from the back mic. So very fascinating. Thank you, Hayden, for your coverage. Cameron, let's talk about a lawsuit that's gained a lot of attention against the state of Texas and Attorney General Ken Paxton over Texas's pro-life laws. It gained a lot of attention specifically this week. Tell us the details.
So 5 women have filed a lawsuit this week claiming the Texas pro-life laws have caused and threatened to cause irreparable injury. And in this lawsuit, which was announced by the Center for Reproductive Rights, and then they later had a follow-up press conference at the Capitol. 2 women in the lawsuit alleged difficulties obtaining an abortion in Texas because of a unique situation of being pregnant with twins and having complications with one of the children in the pregnancy. 2 of the women alleged difficulties due to unexpected medical issues, and the doctors were unable to supply adequate advice on what they should do. And then a 3rd woman had her child diagnosed with a very unique medical issue, who was told the baby was not going to survive, and the doctor was not able to provide, again, adequate advice on what the woman should do in that situation.
So what are the details of what is being alleged in the lawsuit that pertains specifically to Texas's pro-life laws?
So the language present in Texas's abortion laws does have statutes for physicians who believe a medical emergency exists that prevents compliance. And with abortion laws, such as when the life of the mother is at risk, and the physician has a good faith and reasonable understanding of standard medical practice. And so there are statutes in the Texas pro-life laws that protect against a lot of these situations. So when I reached out to Texas Right to Life, I asked them, what is the issue? Why does this occur? And They said much of it comes down to the misinformation in the media and the fact that doctors are being given media misrepresentation about what Texas law actually stipulates, and what needs to be done for these physicians is just better education on what the laws actually allow them to do.
Yeah, there you go. Great coverage. We encourage you to go to the Texan.news and read the article. Lots of great information there from Cameron. Brad, the past 2 sessions, proposals to ban taxpayer-funded lobbying have died in the House, but new proposals have once again been filed. Tell us about them.
Yeah, so not only did they die in the House, but both times were killed by Republicans. In 2019, Representative Trent Ashby successfully amended, and a bunch of other Republicans successfully amended the taxpayer-funded lobbying bill to only apply to certain counties. And so basically 3/4 of the counties, all on the lower population end, were exempted from it. And then Representative Mays Middleton basically voted against his own bill because it had been watered down so much. In last session, Representative Chris Patty, chairman of the State Affairs Committee, basically commandeered Middleton's bill, changed it quite a bit, and then killed it on the House floor before a deadline. So it's an interesting issue because it's not really just a Republican v. Democrat issue. It's Republican v. Republican. And so this time around, Mays Middleton is once again filing the legislation, but this time he's in the Senate as he moved to the upper chamber. On the House side, his companion bill author is Representative Ellen Troxclair, Republican from Austin. Used to be an Austin city councilwoman. Middleton said of this bill, for too long, your hard-earned tax dollars have been diverted to the pockets of Austin lobbyists that then lobby against both parents and taxpayers, talking about tax reform or property tax relief and school choice and any other school-related reforms that Republicans want to push. Troxclair added, heavily utilized by larger liberal cities, this spending is not only lavish, it's also creating an uneven playing field for smaller communities here at the Capitol.
Interesting. So what else is different this time around for this issue?
So the other big difference is that banning taxpayer-funded lobbying is not on the Republican Party of Texas's legislative priority list. Each cycle, they pass 8 issues, and in the last 2, TFL ban had made it. This time it did not make it at last summer's convention. And so despite that, the party is still behind this issue, behind these bills. RPT chair Matt Rinaldi told me, as our platform states, we oppose using taxpayer dollars to hire lobbyists and are encouraged by Senator Middleton's and Representative Troxclair's bills to ban this practice. We support their efforts and look forward to the bill's passage. So
it was included in the list that could be chosen as a priority, correct?
Correct. It did not make the vote, though.
But it was not chosen by the delegates as like a top issue this cycle.
And that means it's one of thousands of issues, maybe not thousands, hundreds of issues that are in the party's platform. There's a ton in there. And so rather than getting this special status, it's now among the many. And so I'm not sure if that's going to affect its chances. Probably it won't do much for how it's going to play out, however that is, because it's much more the fight in the House that is determinant of this, because it's passed the Senate so many times and it has not made it through the House yet. But it'll be interesting to see if another effort to kind of water it down is successful, and then how do these members who are supporting it react? Certainly.
Brad, thanks so much for your coverage. I appreciate it. Matthew, we're coming to you. A federal judge in Texas closed a case challenging the federal ban on bump stocks, but the results left the winners perplexed. Give us those details.
After Austin gun store owner Michael Cargill had an overwhelming victory before a full panel of the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in January, ruling that a Trump administration-era gun control ban on bump stock devices, which are a stock that allows you to shoot a semi-automatic rifle like an AR-15 rapidly, similar to the rate of a fire of a machine gun, was an illegal ban on numerous fronts. The court remanded the case back to a federal district judge in Texas, instructing him to issue an order in favor of Cargill, and cite basically the precedent that they elaborated on in their ruling. This past week, a federal judge for the Western District of Texas, David Ezra, did just what he was instructed to do, but it was sort of a unusual bare minimum. The single-page, 4-sentence ruling basically says that he enters a judgment for the plaintiffs and orders the case closed, but he stopped short of providing any elaboration on the relief that Cargill sought. Now, Cargill, in his original suit, had asked for a litany of things, from setting the rule aside, issuing a nationwide injunction, asking for a motion for summary judgment, and asking for all of his attorney's fees and relevant court costs. The ruling is silent on that, and it left Cargill and his attorneys scratching their heads. And he said he had spoken with attorneys all over the country since that single-page court order dropped, asking them, have you ever seen anything like this? And they said no. As a matter of fact, one seemed to think that it was a bit of a defiance of the Fifth Circuit on the judge's part, not wanting to carry forth the full duties that he should have. Now, Cargill says he's going to take it to mean that the court's granting him everything that he asked for in relief, but he's presently working with his attorneys to figure out the best route forward to clarify that end. Now, last month when we reported on the Fifth Circuit ruling in Cargill's favor, the federal government had the opportunity to appeal, and so the litigation was still pending. We reached out to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, asking them for comment on what the status of their enforcement policies, whether or not they're treating bump stocks still as unregistered machine guns that carry a hefty 20-year criminal penalty prison sentence associated with them. And they declined to comment, citing the pending litigation. So since the judge closed the case, I reached back out to them and asked them, since there's no pending litigation, can you comment now? And they replied back, no, but if you want to know what our enforcement policy is, they attached a link to their website citing their enforcement policy on machine guns, treating them as machine guns. So it was basically an implied, we're still going to enforce these bump stocks as machine guns. So it was very interesting the way they presented it. We'll be looking forward to see what Cargill and his attorneys decide to do in response to this very brief victory. And he had a few entertaining quotes in reaction to it that you'll have to check out in our story on the Texan.
That's exactly right. And we'll continue to watch, but needless to say, not much clarity was provided in all of this. So,
Indeed.
Matt, thanks for your coverage. Cameron, we're coming to you. Representative Steve Toth from the Woodlands has introduced the Women and Child Safety Act. What is the purpose of this proposed law?
So, just in brief, this would require internet service providers, so ISPs, to block internet access to information or material that would aid in the facilitation of obtaining an elective abortion or obtaining abortion-inducing drugs. And so this brings up grounds for judicial review on the topics of data privacy, free speech, digital information, what it means to facilitate an abortion. Could it be defined in both broad and narrow terms? Websites, platforms, what are going to be the definitions for those? And will they be held liable for instituting these regulations?
Placing limits on the internet and content moderation has been a hot button topic for years, to say the least. What are the issues surrounding this bill specifically?
So regulating website information through ISPs is going to be a difficult task to undertake, as ISPs often do not process this online data. that is being asked to track. They usually outsource it to a third-party data broker who then will aggregate the information process and then license it. The content regulation related to the abortion information, which is the aim of Toth's bill, once litigated in court, would likely come down to two separate Section 230 protections. And Section 230 has really been in the cultural sphere in terms of content moderation. And so one of the provisions is called the Good Samaritan Law, which stipulates no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be held liable on the account of, and then it gives ideas for good faith action to restricting access, availability to material. And then the second provision, which is often called the 26 words that created the internet, is stated, treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another. And so these two protections in Section 230 are going to be litigated on in terms of Toth's bill. And with Texas's extensive pro-life laws, and with Section 230 being in front of the Supreme Court right now, we actually saw Justice Clarence Thomas had made remarks on Section 230, giving some insight, saying that we should consider whether the text of this increasingly important statute aligns with the current state of immunity enjoyed by the internet platforms. So this has a very interesting angle in terms of the effects of Section 230 across the nation. And as we will see this proceed along, this bill could actually stand on legal ground based on what happens with Section 230 at the Supreme Court.
Certainly. Cameron, thanks for your coverage. Bradley, we're coming to you. Senator Brian Hughes I misread your beautiful sentence here that you so kindly wrote for me. Senator Brian Hughes filed a bill this week that is likely to be one of the legislature's main rebukes of ESG. What are those details?
So Senator Hughes, who's been probably the foremost legislative critic of ESG in the buildup to the session, he's not far from the only one that's criticized it. But he held the hearing in December. He's on a panel about it at TPPF's event last week. He's been out there quite a bit. But he filed Senate Bill 1446 that would prohibit state pensions or any agent working on their behalf from considering social, political, or ideological factors in their fiduciary decision making. How the decisions they make on investments, moving money from one investment to another, things like that. And so if passed, they would be required to only consider financial factors defined as decisions that would have a material effect on the portfolio's return on investment. So this is a follow-up to last session. Senator Hughes has alluded to this quite a bit, but it goes further than that. It says a pensioner agent is considered to have violated this prohibition if it's reasonably determined to have made a financial decision based on those political factors, which includes public or private statements or joining a coalition that makes political statements. We've seen a lot of companies and countries and local governments sign on to these things like the Net Zero Coalition. It's especially prevalent on the energy climate change side of things. But we see it more and more on other social issues such as abortion, things like that. But we see a lot of these entities joining these coalitions that are just broad statements of what their opinions are on a certain issue. And that is something that the Texas legislature wants to push back on. They don't want their money going to fund those kinds of statements, especially with energy, because oil and gas is so important to the state's financial health. There's like 400,000 some odd people employed by the oil and gas industry in Texas. The state has really taken state Republicans especially have really taken a position of protecting that. And so this is another step towards that aim. The bill would also require the Texas State Pension Review Board to track and make publicly available all the proxy vote information for each state pension system. And so that is something that is very difficult to find. The big pensions already provide that, but it's still difficult to make your way through to understand. So this is kind of a broad sweeping effort to streamline that, make it easier to understand and more publicly available, but also deal with the issue more head on.
How will this fare in the legislature?
So last session, the ledge passed SB 13 with not very much trouble. That prohibited state pension investments in companies deemed to be, quote, divesting or sanctioning fossil fuels. This is the list that we have talked about and written about that Comptroller Glenn Hager published that includes BlackRock. This new bill seems like the next step, taking a more proactive approach to last session's reactive one. Another bill by Hughes that was filed related to this prohibits insurance companies from requiring political statements in exchange for financing. And so there's going to be, I think, multiple bills passed on this. It might just be those two, but more than one, I think. And then with Vanguard, one of the largest asset managers in the world, pulling itself from a climate coalition agreement last year, Republicans see ground being gained in this battle with the biggest drivers of capital in the world. And so this is the next chapter in that. Thank
you, Bradley. Cameron, the child gender modification issue continues to be a huge hot topic here in Texas. A bill was filed this week that caught a lot of attention. What's different about this proposal?
So Representative Jeff Leach filed this bill that would require health insurance coverage for individuals who have suffered adverse effects of gender transition and who are seeking a gender reversal. And this, as I suspect, is being filed because there was the TPPF event last week that had a gender modification panel. And one of the panelists was Chloe Cole, who spoke about her experience and the negative effects of the process of her gender reversal and how she didn't have any support through the process from healthcare providers.
How prevalent is gender modification, and why does it seem like it has become so centered in our social issues?
Well, just some interesting numbers that I came across. The number of teenagers who identify as transgender has risen between 2017 and 2022. There are now over 300,000 children aged 13 to 17 who identify as transgender. And I got these numbers from the Williams Institute, which is a progressive think tank that focuses on gender issues. And one of the many hypotheses as to what is causing the sharp incline in identification is this idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria. And what rapid onset gender dysphoria is a emergent phenomenon where young people, through social influence, poor mental health, neurodevelopmental disabilities, maladaptive coping skills, they will begin to identify as this opposite gender. And so what the medical community has done in sort of a reactive way has adopted this idea of gender affirming care. And I know we've all heard gender affirming care as being this model for treating cases of gender dysphoria. That's because within this gender affirming care model, doctors will now support the idea that gender may be fluid and is not binary. So these sorts of definitions have made their way out of the universities into the medical community and now into people's individual lives. And it's having real effects. So contrary to a lot of reports that we've seen in different media outlets that will say child gender modification options, such as puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, that they are reversible. Well, in actuality, they are not completely reversible, because what we found out is some scientists are worried about putting off puberty in children may disrupt bone and brain development and reduce the bone density, which leads to cognitive problems also in the brain development. I actually found some of this information from the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And in a report, they said they have limited data on the use of cross-sex hormones, in that there was associations with cardiovascular and metabolic risks when using hormone therapies. And so, is there coverage for people right now who are facing challenges with their health insurance and trying to detransition? Well, Medicare covers hormone therapy and gender transition related surgeries if it is deemed medically necessary. And as I just went over, there's been a change in a lot of these definitions in terms of gender affirming care. So we've seen a lot of these cases deemed medically necessary, where previous years we might not have thought of these as being medically necessary. So with the changing landscape of these definitions and what is becoming the norm in how these words are defined as medically necessary, this bill would now cover individuals who have had negative effects due to gender transition and are seeking gender reversal.
Wow. Well, Cameron, thank you for your coverage. Bradley, you followed the saga out in Amarillo last year involving an odd maneuver used to approve $250 million in debt. Now the legislature is intent on striking back. Tell us about it.
Senator Kevin Sparks filed this week a few bills related to local government debt, but the headliner is Senate Bill 1810. It would restrict the conditions necessary for a local government to issue a tax anticipation note by forbidding it within 5 years of voters rejecting the project that it is intending to be used for. It requires its fiscal note to be no more than 5% of the local government's outstanding debt total, or prohibits it if 5% of the locality's registered voters sign a petition opposing the issuance. Senator Sparks said in a statement, Texas has one of the highest local bond indebtedness in the country. I think it's about, at this point, $14,000 per citizen. And that's third to only New York and California. Unless we do something to change course, Texas will continue to be mired in debt. So last year, Amarillo officials approved the $260 million tax anticipation note to expand its civic center, less than 2 years after voters rejected a $275 million bond for the same purpose. They were sued in court and they lost. And so the judge, though, did not rule on the merits of them using this maneuver. The judge ruled that they violated public notice requirements. And so technically, if they had adhered to those public notice requirements, this could have gone through. But TANs are like bridge loans meant to get a government through dry periods between points of inflowing revenues. It's not intended to pay for capital expenditures, but the city planned to issue certificates of obligation, another form of non-voter approved debt, to refinance that TAN debt after its initial issuance. And one legislator called it the most egregious abuse of Texas financing law that I've ever seen in my long career. I think this bill is going to pass through both chambers pretty speedily.
Thank you, Bradley. Hayden, a federal judge in Florida dealt a blow to Biden's immigration policy. What could be the significance of this decision?
In September of 2021, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and his subordinates published a memo outlining an alternatives to detention program. As I understand it, these were more or less more lenient deportation guidelines for illegal immigrants, asylum seekers, and other foreign nationals who are seeking to stay here. One of the elements of this is a humanitarian parole program. This is not parole in the sense of being released from prison on certain conditions. It's parole in a different sense of people being allowed to stay in the country for extenuating circumstances. This is the program that was used to admit people from Afghanistan fleeing the turmoil there and Ukrainians fleeing the war in Russia. But the federal judge in Pensacola, Florida, determined, in his opinion, that this program is illegal under the Administrative Procedure Act, and he blocked it, staying his decision for 7 days, giving the federal government time to appeal. This judge is an appointee of President Trump, and the decision was notable for a quote that he included in his decision. Judge T. Kent Wetherill said, quote, "For the most part, the court finds in favor of Florida because, as detailed below, the evidence establishes that defendants have effectively turned the southwest border into a meaningless line in the sand and little more than a speed bump for aliens flooding into the country by prioritizing, quote, alternatives to detention, end quote, over actual detention." And it was a pretty long run-on sentence, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but obviously critics would say that that's a pretty political statement to include in a judicial decision by this Trump-appointed judge, but he has, for the time being, blocked these more lenient guidelines.
There you go. Hayden, thank you. Matthew, coming to you for the last story of the docket here. Several Texas taxpayers are asking the Texas Supreme Court to strike down a scheme by the city of Austin to pay union workers a taxpayer-funded salary. Give us the details.
Litigants Roger Brigelt, Mark Pulliam, and Jay Wiley argue that a scheme by the city of Austin to pay members of the private Austin Firefighters Association union a full-time taxpayer-funded salary to perform work solely for the union violates several provisions of the Texas Constitution, namely the gift clauses, which generally operate to prohibit public funds from being used for a private purpose. Several major conservative organizations are assisting in the lawsuit, including the Texas Public Policy Foundation and the Goldwater Institute, and another one that filed an amicus brief, the National Right to Work Foundation. Interestingly, the National Right to Work Foundation says that the city of Austin is also violating the U.S. Supreme Court findings in the landmark Right to Work Janus decision. And in their amicus brief with the court, they explained their reasoning behind that argument. Litigants argue that the Texas Third Court of Appeals erred in siding with the city in their decision and are asking the Texas Supreme Court to take up the case for review.
Oof, there you go. We'll keep an eye on it. Gentlemen, thank you for your coverage. Let's move on to the tweetery section here. We're nearing the end of our podcast, and we certainly want to get to the end of the fun topic here and talk about Kim a little bit. But let's start with some tweets from the week that caught our eye. So, Brad, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Mine pertains to more than a few tweets that were sent out. Representative Brian Slayton filed his Texas secession bill this week, and as expected, it sparked quite a fiery response from people, both for and against. And typical of this issue, the exchanges on Twitter were not very enlightening. You know, people took sides and stuck with it, and then things got pretty personal pretty quick. But the issue itself is pretty interesting, whether Texas can secede if it wanted to. I wrote a piece last year on that, or maybe 2021 on that. It's got a lot of nuance to it. It's pretty interesting. Obviously, that is a different question from whether Texas should secede. But these two things are kind of getting blended together, and it's leading to a pretty gross news cycle, I would say. But I think there are people on both sides that make very good points, and I just wanted to mention that it's an interesting topic if that's something you're curious about.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of fun Twitter action going on there. Hayden, what about you?
Well, I'm cheating a little bit because I'm linking to my own tweet, but I tweeted because I saw somebody else's tweet, so I think this is allowed. But anyway, I saw a tweet about a bill in the Arizona Senate that died that would have divided Maricopa County, which is the county where Phoenix is the seat, into 4 different counties. And the Arizona Senate voted it down 18 to 12, excuse me. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, that county has been in national headlines for years now. So pretty interesting to see that all go down.
It's one of those counties. I don't know how much of the population of Arizona is in Maricopa County. It is most people in Arizona live in Maricopa County. It's a huge county.
Yeah.
And it could probably be a state by itself if you isolated it out a little bit like Harris County. I don't know what its population is, but evidently there was enough support that they debated and voted on it, but they couldn't get it done.
Yeah. My parents live in Maricopa County, and my sister and brother-in-law, and I sent this to them, and some of them knew about it, some of them didn't, but like it's just been wild to see this. Like they live on the outskirts, so it's like quiet, it's chill, but Maricopa County is hugely populated. It's one of the fastest growing areas of the country. So much growth and like infrastructure, like they're really handling it well in a lot of ways, but the scandals or the just election type issues are what make Maricopa County the hotbed that it is. So very fascinating. And I'm very curious to kind of like dig into how that debate all settled out and who was on what side and the rhetoric that was being used to talk about it. So Hayden, thanks for flagging that for us. Cameron, what do you have for us? I just see this in the docket and I'm excited about it already.
Well, we get so caught up in this milieu of bills and laws, definition. We need to bring something fun, different to the podcast. So I came across a story that apparently 20 years ago, a volunteer at a zoo just about an hour outside of Austin just walked off with an alligator egg in her pocket, and apparently has been raising this alligator in her backyard for the past 20 years. And so
just casually
having an alligator in the backyard, just a pet. Well, I guess it grew to over 8 feet long. And the the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department got a call like, hey, someone is raising an alligator as a pet. Can you guys come check this out? So they returned the alligator to the zoo. It's being
after 20 years.
After 20 years, being reintroduced to all its probably long lost brothers and sisters. And I thought this was interesting because can you keep an alligator as a pet? I guess you can get a permit to have an alligator as a pet, but it has to be for educational purposes or for research. You can't just take an alligator egg from a lake or river and start raising it.
You mean you can't have an emotional support alligator?
Maybe you could.
Could not imagine getting on a plane with someone.
I just want to know if you're dating, what date is it that you bring up the fact that you're raising an alligator in your backyard that you abducted?
Oh my gosh.
It's gonna come up, right?
Because eventually you're going to have to mention it. So I wonder how that works out.
Have y'all ever seen that Leave It to Beaver episode where he's got the comic book and at the back end of it there's send us $1.50 or something like that and we'll send you a live alligator. So he sends off for it, and sure enough, if they get a box, he and his brother get a box in the mail and they open it up and it's got a baby alligator in it. So they didn't know what to do with it. So they decide to keep it in the toilet tank. And so they start growing this alligator in the toilet tank and keeping it hidden from the parents, and it finally gets too big to keep it in the toilet tank. It was a great episode.
Oh, man.
Reminds me of it.
I've never seen it. Well, that's fascinating. Growing up, I knew I knew one family, and he was like, we called him the reptile man, and he had a bunch of alligators and snakes and pythons and just different things that he kept, and he would go to schools or like classrooms and teach kids about the reptiles. Right. So I guess that might be
like you can have a permit if you're going to go show off your pets.
Yes,
but you can't just
have an alligator. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's wild. I really love that. Matt, what about you? What did you find?
Well, I was sitting in the Texas Senate yesterday, actually, and they took up Senate Resolution 280 that I tweeted about. So I'm mentioning my own tweet here. But I thought it was pretty cool because the Senate honored the 200th anniversary of the Texas Constables. And there was 25 or 30 constables on hand from around the state for the passage of this resolution. But it's a pretty cool resolution that was taken up by Senators Birdwell, Hughes, and Colcourse that kind of goes into the history of the office, how it was established by Stephen F. Austin in 1823 and is one of, 2 peace officers established in the Texas Constitution, and how there's 780 of them across the state, and talks about, how diverse the law enforcement agencies can be, from just a single person to big agencies with deputies that do investigative stuff, how they're kind of known as the people's police. And I just thought it was kind of interesting because actually my dad was a constable a long, long time ago. And so it was pretty interesting going in and reading the history of it, and seeing the interesting role that this constitutional office plays in the state. So, it's definitely a resolution that's worth a read.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Matthew. Okay, gentlemen, we're going to pivot to our fun topic, which is also just a very sad topic. Kim Roberts, if y'all tuned into the podcast last week, you heard that she will be leaving our team. She published her last piece with us this week, and is saying her goodbyes, which just suck. We don't like to say goodbye to any member.
I don't like it. I don't like it at all.
Oh man, Hayden has been dreading this for a long time. But regardless, we just want to take some time and thank her for all her work that she's done to provide awesome coverage of Tarrant County and just other statewide issues, whether it be high-speed rail, or medical care during COVID, whatever it was. She's just provided an incredible standard of journalism for our readers. So we wanted to say thank you, Kim. And she couldn't join the podcast this week. She's off doing fancy lawyer things. But we wanted to take a moment and just commiserate and say she's just incredible and that we'll miss her dearly while she's gone. I'm trying to think my favorite story from Kim. I'm having a hard time picking just one.
I have one that comes to mind.
Bring it on.
So as we were preparing for our event on the legislative event and our panel discussions, she has a bit of an expertise in public speaking and everything like that. So we were each sitting down, getting a bit of a training with her, and said, okay, well, give us a minute speech or something like this, and recite it to me like you're sitting in front of an audience, and I will critique it. I was like, oh, okay. So I gave this response, and she goes, so the first thing that I notice is that whenever you speak, your arms are just like all over the place. Like you really talk with your arms. And she's like, you were way up here at one point, and all this sort of stuff. She's like, you got to keep your hands like otherwise you're just going to look very animated. And I thought, oh snap, I do that.
Yeah.
I am a hand talker.
Totally. And you don't notice those things until somebody points them out to you, right? It's hard to know these things about yourself. But I think that's
just an example of, one of many instances in which her input and her wisdom, she's just been a fantastic colleague to work with, and will be greatly missed. And she's made me a better reporter than I think a lot of us can probably share that sentiment as well.
Yeah,
she knows her stuff.
I've worked with Kim. It's a little bit surreal to be having this conversation because I've known Kim for a long time, but I've worked with her for the past 3 or 4 years because before I even moved to Austin, I coached high school speech and debate with her in North Texas at a new debate club that had been started. And I was introduced to that through some mutual friends, and Kim and I ended up coaching a parliamentary debate, which was a lot of fun. And that was how I ended up being introduced to the Texan. And so I also just appreciate Kim's advice and mentorship of me over the years. And that goes back to when I was in high school. She provided, she judged speech and debate rounds that I was involved in, and she provided feedback that was so helpful. That's why that when we did have that workshop where Kim was training us on our speaking style, that was really nostalgic. And as far as fun stories go, I always enjoyed all the times that Kim and Holly would tag team in Slack and gang up on the rest of us. And they would kind of be the rebel group in Slack, and they would kind of get things going and it would be funny to watch them cause trouble in Slack. And even at our Kim just has a great sense of humor. Even at our company event last year that we talked about parliamentary procedure earlier, I think I mentioned that I was that I had been involved in that in high school, and Kim just relentlessly made fun of me, and it was a lot of funny to just watch her get a kick out of that. So we will miss Kim. I will definitely miss Kim. It's going to feel bizarre not working with Kim anymore, having worked with Kim for so many years, but we appreciate her. And now that she's going to be practicing law again, it'll be fun to kind of continue to get her perspective on things as well.
Well, that was one thing she was able to provide, in addition to her expertise of many different issues, was her legal background of being able to say, this is how the court system works, or like just provide, a lot of context for us who aren't as familiar with the system.
Yeah, I mean, that's perfect transition to what I was going to say. I was writing a piece on the Texas-New Mexico lawsuit over the Rio Grande River and water coming from Colorado down into Texas. And I thought it was quirky and interesting, states suing each other over water. Then she goes, it's an original jurisdiction case, meaning this was the original jurisdiction of the U.S. Supreme Court to handle disputes between states. And I didn't know that. And so that made an interesting aspect of the piece to write, and wouldn't have known that without her saying that. So yeah, I second everything Hayden said.
She knows her stuff. I'll miss her dry sense of humor and the way she keeps us all in line, particularly you boys. Oftentimes I am on an island as the only gal temporarily in this office, and Kim and Holly have always provided, well, for the most part, unless they're causing chaos, specifically Holly, but Kim has always provided like a little bit of a backup for me, and I've appreciated that so much. But she's brilliant. She knows what she's doing. She's written so well, and over the years, I mean, she's been with us for a very long time, even before Hayden, which is wild because Hayden's been with us for a long time too. And if it weren't for Kim, we likely wouldn't have connected with Hayden as quickly as we did. And we're so grateful for that too. But throughout all of this, she's really, there's been a small army of people who very consistently will write her and thank her for her reporting. And she's kindly shared that with Connie and I, just different emails that she's gotten from readers, praising her work or just thanking her for covering issues that so often mainstream outlets don't necessarily pay attention to. And
nobody else has covered Texas Central
the way she has. There's actually a pretty funny email. Good article. My family owns a piece of land that is being held hostage by this boondoggle. I suggest that the article should have been titled, Texas High-Speed Rail Hasn't Moved an Inch, or The Little Train That Couldn't. There are just a lot of very sweet and endearing emails and responses that she's gotten over the years for her reporting, and rightfully so. So, Kim, we're just appreciative of all the work you've done to help us build this business over the last few years. And we'll miss you. Don't be a stranger. And I think it's just bittersweet for all of us. I will say we've, again, because of Kim's network, very quickly found somebody to cover her beats, at least for the meanwhile. Seth Moorhead has officially joined our team, published his first piece this week. He did awesome work and will be covering Tarrant County and a lot of short-term rentals, high-speed rail he's also interested in. So there will be continued coverage of those issues right away. So we're very grateful for that easy transition. So make sure to go welcome Seth to the team. You can find him on Twitter.
And he's a natural reporter. I mean, his first article was excellent.
Awesome.
So I'm looking forward to reading more of his coverage.
Yeah, I will. I'm so grateful, and we'll take him as long as we can get him. He's done a great job for us so far. So regardless, let's Kim's last week.
I don't like it.
I know.
Every time you say it, no, I'll just text him. We decided, we voted, you can't quit. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to stay.
The executive committee of the Texan is in this room, and we've met. You're not on it. You don't get a say.
Yeah. Your departure is denied. We decided we'd miss you too much.
Exactly. I don't think it'll be real for me until she's not on Slack anymore and not coming in with her little comments.
And I'm gonna think, I need to tag Kim. Oh, I can't. tag Kim on Slack.
I know.
I'm making this way more difficult than it needs to be.
Man, Hayden kept being like, just warn me when it's her last day.
I don't want
Mac,
it to
I
be
need to
abrupt.
know. I need to know.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, Kim, we're grateful for you. Folks, thanks so much for listening, especially as we commiserated and got caught up in nostalgia here in these last few minutes. We appreciate you listening each and every week, and we'll catch you on next week's episode. Thank you to everyone for listening. If you enjoy our show, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want more of our stories, subscribe to The Texan at thetexan.news. Follow us on social media for the latest in Texas politics, and send any questions for our team to our mailbag by DMing us on Twitter or shooting an email to editor@thetexan.news. We are funded entirely by readers and listeners like you, so thank you again for your support. Tune in next week for another episode of our weekly roundup. God bless you, and God bless Texas.